Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at the escalation in eastern Ukraine, which continues. Ultimatums from Kiev being ignored. Let's say hello now to James Creedon of our Media Watch segment. And throughout the conversation, James, we've been saying how differently the story is being spun, whether you're in the West or you're in Moscow.
That's right. There's been a lot of finger-pointing about propaganda, about spinning the story on both sides, in fact. And one article that's got a lot of hits over the weekend, Francois, is on Forbes.com. This article is pointing to a pretty blatant example of propaganda in the Russian media over events in Ukraine. Take a look at this gentleman here. He's a guy by the name of Andrei Petkov. Now, that's on Russia 1, or Vesti. Now, here he is an ordinary citizen, Francois. He's been attacked by neo-Nazis, at least that's the story he's telling on Russia 1. But if you scroll down a little further, you see another photograph of the same gentleman, and this time on another network.
I'm going to interrupt you, James, because we have live coverage now of a statement by Catherine Ashton, the EU's foreign policy chief, coming out of that foreign ministers' meeting in Luxembourg.
In Egypt over the last few days as well. We believe it's up to the regime to ensure tangible and long-lasting improvements in that situation, especially on humanitarian aid. We want to ensure that the deadline for the destruction of chemical weapons is kept. That's the 30th of June. This is extremely important. And we also recognise the importance of support for the neighbours of Syria. We want to help them as they manage looking after refugees, and we will continue with our aid and support to those countries as well as to the internally displaced people in Syria. We also discussed the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina and the socio-economic as well as political challenges that they're facing. First responsibility to deal with those lies with the leadership of the country. We call upon them to provide concrete and quick answers to the legitimate concerns and aspirations of the people. Ahead of the October elections, more, not less, needs to be done. In the short term, it's important for the institutions and leaders in Bosnia-Herzegovina to focus on a number of key priorities, particularly the socio-economic issues, especially high unemployment among young people. We're ready to support the efforts that they make through a number of initiatives, including a Compact for Growth. This is an effort coordinated with international partners to assist the institutions in Bosnia-Herzegovina in reforming the economy and creating new opportunities for citizens. After the elections, they will need to engage on a broader set of issues. The efficiency and the functionality of institutions there need to improve at all levels. We, of course, remain committed to their European perspective, but work needs to step up to regain some positive momentum, and we will continue with our efforts to help support that. But the extremely worrying situation in Ukraine was at the top of our agenda today. We condemn unreservedly the actions by armed individuals in the cities of eastern Ukraine. These attempts at destabilising Ukraine must stop. We strongly support the unity, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. We call upon Russia to do so as well and to pull back its troops from the Ukrainian border. Any further actions aimed at destabilising Ukraine have to stop. In light of the latest events, we decided to expand the list of those subject to asset freeze and visa bans. Utmost restraint is crucial. We commend the Ukrainian authorities for pursuing their law and order operations in a measured manner, and we encourage the government in Kiev to contribute further to reducing tensions. Free and fair presidential elections on the 25th of May are the best way to express the will of the citizens, as is the process of constitutional reform. We'll continue to support the efforts to stabilise the situation in Ukraine economically, financially and politically. With this in mind, we've today approved two key measures from the package of proposals aimed at providing economic and financial support to Ukraine. First, a decision providing up to €1 billion in macro-financial assistance to Ukraine to support economic stabilisation and its structural reform agenda. Secondly, a regulation granting unilateral trade preferences to Ukraine. In the meantime, we'll also look into a possible CSDP mission in the field of civilian security sector reform. And ministers have asked the European Commission to reply on the basis of consultations with member states to the letter of President Putin on energy supplies. We'll also continue our diplomatic engagement to try and de-escalate the crisis and stabilise the situation. It is crucial that Russia and Ukraine engage in a meaningful dialogue to find a political solution, and we're ready to participate in the efforts to start this dialogue. I'm in regular touch with the foreign ministers of the United States, Russia and Ukraine, and will meet them this Thursday in Geneva. The purpose of this meeting is to start a dialogue on how to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine and to ensure that peace and stability returns to the whole of Ukraine. Thanks.
We've got time to take 3 questions, so I'll start there. Thank you.
All right, there you heard it. Catherine Ashton, the EU Foreign Policy Chief, coming out of that meeting in Luxembourg, saying ahead of that summit that's taking place perhaps next week in Brussels, that there's already an enhanced list of Russian citizens who are on a sanctions list. We were talking with James Creedon, who's doing our Media Watch segment, and you were telling us before we went to Luxembourg, priority given to live coverage here, about how the story is being spun in Russian media.
That's right, Francois. And one pretty blatant example of propaganda in the Russian media over the last week or so is this gentleman. Now, the image that you're seeing on screen there is on Russia 1, so state television. He's posing as an ordinary citizen. His name is Andrei Petkov. Now, if you move a little bit further down, I'll just scroll down far, you can see on another channel, NTV National News, that this time he's confessing to be a German spy and adopting a very different tone, a kind of a contrite tone. Now, you move down further again, exactly the same gentleman, Andrei Petkov, but this time he's posing as a prominent pediatric surgeon who's moved back to the city of Nikolaev in southern Ukraine. He has saved the lives of many children, and he is helping to organise protests. It's a pretty blatant example of propaganda, Francois, which has been picked up by Forbes.com. Now, elsewhere, just to give you a sense of other items that are being picked up on social media and elsewhere today, this is a tweet, Francois, by the Lithuanian Minister for Foreign Affairs. Now, 2 types of protests, he says. One for freedom, and he's referring to Maidan, the protests, of course, which saw the overthrow of Yanukovych, and the other for dependence. And the equipment says it all. So what he's saying here is that the protests on Maidan were peaceful, and that the protests we're seeing in eastern Ukraine and elsewhere are a very different kind of protest. You can see here armed and wearing fatigues, right? So that has been criticised as well in the comments of that tweet. Some people saying, well, the Maidan protests were far from peaceful. There was sniper fire and people were killed. So you can see just, I suppose, 2 examples of I'm not sure you'd call that propaganda, but certainly in the comment section, it is being called that. Now, just to very briefly finish with this, the French media are picking up on Foreign Minister Lavrov in Russia, what he has been saying about Mayotte, the French département, an island that was formerly part of the Comoros Islands, just northwest of Madagascar. It became a French territory in 2001 by referendum. For the Russians, this is essentially the same as the referendum that we saw in Crimea. Obviously, the French media taking issue with that comparison, Francois.
All right, thanks very much, James Creedon. There'll be more Media Watch later on. Thanks
Indeed.
for
Thanks,
that. We're going to say hello once more to our guests and perhaps ask them what they think of the fast-breaking news that's developing on all of this. Joachim BITTERLICH, welcome back. You're former ambassador to NATO, former advisor to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. We're also with journalist Catherine Field, Anna GARMASH of the Euro-Maidan Collective. And joining us from Donetsk is Elena, who has joined the protest movements there, but in favor of the Russian-speaking side. Joachim BITTERLICH, your thoughts on what Catherine Ashton said? First of all, they announced already then that list of enhanced number of Russians under sanctions. Your thoughts on that?
I think the EU is right to underline clearly to the Russians, please, dear friends, there are limits. And you have to observe these limits, you have to de-escalate, as we try to do it, and to come and to start a real dialogue under inclusion of the Ukrainians, because it's finally up to them to define what they want to do. And when you look at the situation as a whole, there is this mixture, I think, freedom on the one hand, even freedom from Russia or freedom as such, and at the same time, economic and social unrest. The people are not satisfied at all. And if you look at the last 20 years of existence of this new Ukraine, Ukraine has never been able to establish what I call a stable country in this sense. And therefore, it was really easy to establish a sort of unrest or dissatisfaction, either in the west of the country or in the east. And if you listen to these people, if you listen, for example, to Elena here, it's clear it's a split soul, if you want, to some extent. On the one hand, well, she's living in the Ukraine. On the other hand, she has, let's say, a sort of Russian past. And the first hope is someone has to help us to stabilize the country. Someone has to help us to pay our salaries. Someone has to help us to some extent. And they don't know where to go to some extent. And therefore, I think the first goal has to be to stabilize the country again, and from there to discuss together what's the best for the future of Ukraine, if you want. And one of these ideas could be a certain federalism in that country, a certain autonomy of the regions. This may apply to the West as it may apply to the East, but at the same time assure, let's say, the integrity of at least of the rest of the country as it is. I think in this sense, what the interim president has told this morning is going in the right sense, if you want, to tell where we are ready, we are not opposed at the same time on the 25th of May to a sort of a referendum about, let's say, the internal structure of a country, a certain federalism. I think it's in the right direction.
All right, there you see one reaction from a viewer. The situation should be resolved by Ukrainians, not by the EU, the US, or Russia. The EU can't solve everyone's internal conflicts. Let's go to Elena in Donetsk. Elena, let me ask you, the Russian interim president, the prime minister, in the past 48 hours, they are talking about federalism. They're talking about even the prospect of a referendum on the same day where there are presidential elections. What's your reaction?
Actually, in this situation where we have lost our representation in the parliament because our president disappeared, as the party of regions don't have any power, and the parties that are in the coalition haven't had at any time here a lot of votes, so we consider that we are not represented in the parliament. We can't accept we consider that this government is illegal, so we can't accept the decisions of this government. And in this situation, we think that we can decide the destiny of our region by ourselves. And we consider that the regional referendum is the best way, the supreme way to know the will of the will of the people, the will of our citizens that live in our region. So I think that the new government should negotiate with our National Assembly, Popular Assembly, Popular Congress. Let's call it like this.
So you're in favor of the idea of a referendum?
And,
Is this Go ahead.
The questions of the referendum are not decided yet, but perhaps there will be three options. Donetsk region as a part of federal Ukraine, as a federation with a big autonomy, with its own parliament, with its language, at least after 20 years of discrimination. The second option, Donetsk region as an independent state, and the third option, the Donetsk region as a federal part, as a federation with big autonomy, as a part of Russian Federation.
And which would you vote for?
Which would I would prefer the second or the third.
Okay. Anna GARMASH, your reaction.
Because we don't have confidence in this government, which arrived to power not by the political way, but the terrorist methods, and we don't have confidence. We have lost confidence in them.
Anna GARMASH, your thoughts
We don't
on...
believe that the result
Elena,
of this national referendum will be true.
All right, let me bring in Anna GARMASH. First of all, you heard several points there from Elena. First of all, she questions whether or not a credible referendum can be organized by authorities in Kiev. And then she says she is in favor either of an independent state or perhaps joining and having a status within the Russian Federation. Your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the other points that she actually mentioned as well is that she doesn't really recognize the current government. And it's a temporary government. It makes perfect sense that it will be removed at some point after presidential elections and after parliamentary elections. And I hope, as well as she does probably, that the new government and the new parliament are going to be way more representative of Ukraine as a whole than the government is now. So that's the first thing. And I think this will answer a lot of their questions already in the first place. Then, being part of the Russian Federation, actually the latest polls conducted in the eastern Ukraine actually proved that less than 20% of the people actually wish to be part of Russia. So any sort of referendum asking this particular questions, whether you do, yes or no, want to be part of Russia, will certainly, well, in this sense, fail.
All right, a lot of reactions coming in. One saying, looking at the passive police in East Ukraine, it seems their only job in the last 20 years was taking bribes. Not sure if that's a correct characterization, but there you go. Protesters, by the way, this Monday, marching to the home of Donetsk's most famous citizen, Ukraine's richest man, Rinat Akhmatov, asking him to publicly repudiate pro-Russian separatists, or at least state his position openly. Akhmatov's office in Kiev, by the way, was attacked over the weekend. How important, Anna GARMASH, is Rinat Akhmatov in all this?
Extremely important, actually. It's probably the first man in Donetsk as such. And actually, he was considered at some point as probably one of the most powerful people in Ukraine in general. He's extremely rich and he owns a large part of the Ukrainian industry.
Elena, would you like to hear more from Rinat Akhmatov?
Well, could you repeat please the question?
I was saying, would you like to hear more from Rinat Akhmatov?
To hear more, what do you mean?
Should he be?
Do you know anything about him?
Should he be speaking out publicly and giving his position?
I haven't understood. Could you please reformulate your question, because the quality of the sound is not very good. I'm sorry.
Rinat Akhmatov, Ukraine's richest man, who was at one point a big backer of the ousted president Viktor Yanukovych. He's been playing kind of a middleman role behind the scenes. Would you like to see him take a stance, much more public stance, in one way or another?
I think that he should negotiate also with the Popular Congress, the Popular Congress of our Popular Congress of the Donetsk region, the temporary government, our temporary popular government. He should negotiate with them, because they represent more than 35 organizations, parties and social organizations.
Catherine,
and almost all the towns of the Donetsk region.
Catherine Field, there is this sense listening to.
Akhmatov should take into account the opinion of the Popular Congress.
What's your reaction listening to Elena?
Well, I think first of all, everything needs to be calmed down a lot. And what I would have liked to have seen today from Catherine Ashton is some sort of mechanism where there can be monitors put into eastern Ukraine. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen any type of movement towards getting independent monitors in. I know it was difficult getting them into Crimea, but we haven't seen that. So we need to have more information. We need to also, I know it's difficult, we need to figure out exactly what Vladimir Putin is doing. The big question is, does he want eastern Ukraine, or does he want a weak Ukraine that is subservient to Russia? it's really, if he decides to go into eastern Ukraine, it's a very expensive job. He would have to provide eastern Ukraine with everything. And when I say everything, I mean from pensions to milk to bread to gas, the lot. That's a very, very expensive thing. So it's in his interest to have a weak Ukraine. So we should be moving much more quickly, or the West should be moving much more quickly to get some more information on the ground, figure out much more quickly what is happening, have more engagement with the Russian side to that. And to not have this thing where we're waiting for sanctions to come in a week's time. This is one of the most important, most dangerous situations that Ukraine has seen since November. It is the most important situation that's happened since the end of the Cold War. We're sitting here in Paris, and there's going to be a meeting of European heads of state next week.
But they did announce sanctions for today, an enhanced list of sanctions of citizens who are Russian citizens who are under EU sanctions.
Yes, it is very good, but that's not enough.
Joachim BITTERLICH, not enough?
What's more important, in my eyes, is to start immediately a real dialogue with the Russians under inclusion of the Ukrainians.
Which is what is scheduled for Thursday.
Exactly, to talk together, let's say to have at least a start of this dialogue, to look at what are the possible schemes of a solution of this crisis. But again, a summit, I don't know why. I don't see the sense of another summit. We have now to act and to talk to the Russians. In such a dangerous situation, please, let's talk and let's discuss where are the real goals of the Russians. We have to know it. Is it really, let's say, as Catherine has told, weakening the Ukraine, or to have at least a neutral Ukraine alongside of a border of Russia, or do they want more? Is it a more federal regime? Is this sufficient? What does this mean for the Russians? We have to know their intentions a bit more. And on the other hand, please, we have to discuss this with Ukrainians. Ukraine has for the moment an interim government. That's all. And we have to make it clear to the Russians, let's organize the elections, let's help them. We have a body in Europe for that purpose. It's the OSCE in Vienna that can control it, supervise it, to see that all Russian regions are well represented in a parliament, and then to see, let's organize it with the Russians under their inclusion in a peaceful way. And we have to test this way, if it works or not.
I think we've had the example in Scotland where there is a referendum. There are ways that you can have a referendum that are properly worked out, where everyone has their say, and not a repeat of what we saw in Crimea, where one day to the next there was a referendum and it was a yes, no.
Absolutely, with no possible discussion, actually, no sharing of
Ambassador BITTERLICH, I don't know how much of a Kremlinologist you are, but do you think that Putin, it's a question we've posed before, is improvising, or is he a man with a plan?
I think he had a plan with regard to the Crimea. It's not a new one, it's a classical one, more or less. And in the language of football, he has got a golden pass by the European Union in that field. I regret it. But I think that with regard to the rest, to some extent, he's improvising.
All right, comments coming in. I do think the mess in Ukraine is created by the unnecessary intervention of the U.S., tailed by the EU in its internal affairs. Before we go, let's hear what the French foreign minister had to say coming out of that meeting in Luxembourg.
If necessary, there could be a meeting next week with European heads of state, which could result in further sanctions. It's the position of France and the European Union to increase pressure without making dialogue impossible.
And that meeting, of course, on Thursday will be the next step, that meeting in Geneva. Of course, this, as the situation continues to escalate, I want to thank our panel. Anna GARMASH. I want to thank Elena for joining us from the city of Donetsk in eastern Ukraine this Monday, as well as Joachim BITTERLICH and Catherine Field. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.